is Dave Reski, CEO of Now Speed Marketing, and welcome to this edition of In the Now, where we focus on uncovering the myths and misunderstandings of marketing and leadership with some of the world's most interesting people. And my guest today is Evan Rudowski. I've known Evan for, 10 years or so?
At least, yeah.
Yeah, and so welcome to the show. I really appreciate you being here today.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Evan is a very busy guy. You're the Chief Commercial Officer at Rocket Makers. You're a private investor at Avon Mutual and a co-founder of SubHub. Is that correct?
Yeah, although I actually left Rocket Makers several months ago. Yes, but I was there for about 4 years, and a great company focused on working with entrepreneurs to build the software that powers their businesses. So we can definitely talk about a lot of that kind of thing, because that's part of what I've been doing my whole career in one way or another.
That's great. So a lot of your expertise is really in software development and building products. So we're going to explore some of that today. And I think that you've been doing it for a long time, so you've got a lot of deep experience in that area.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, I'm not a programmer, I'm not a software developer, but I've always ended up working in businesses that are powered by software and rely on it. So I definitely have a perspective around, what it takes to get the most out of building software, stuff I've learned through sometimes making mistakes and then sometimes doing it right.
Yeah, that's great. So we're going to talk about, I like to start these conversations with a Mythbuster question. And these days, a lot of companies are working to find competitive advantage through software and product development. And it's even product-oriented companies, but also other companies are investing heavily in software development. So when you're building a new product, here's the myth I want you to expose, right? You should build a product that fully meets the needs of a very specific niche in order to have the best chance of success. True or not true? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think I would say that that's true. But of course, the tricky part is getting to the point where you've successfully fulfilled those criteria. And it's usually not at the very beginning. So I think it's definitely true that it's important to understand a pain point or some sort of significant benefit for your target audience. So there are probably exceptions, like there are to every rule, but I think most of the most successful entrepreneurs I've seen have identified, either some significant benefit that they can provide that isn't being provided sufficiently well by others, or probably even more frequently solving a pain point, some sort of point of friction, something that's giving people, difficulty, or that if it could be better, they would be more effective and successful. So entrepreneurs who can figure that out and deliver that, I think, can be more successful. And that depends on knowing a market well enough to be able to identify that. And, I think that some entrepreneurs are smart and savvy enough to be able to just look at a new market that they maybe haven't looked at before and identify those pain points through research and, and investigation and asking questions. But a lot of people, of course, come out of a particular sector, and by working in that sector, they've experienced the pain points and they come up with an idea that can help to solve that. And, at that point, then it gets into the question of how we build that and how we make that actually work, how we translate that vision of solving the pain into something that's deliverable and that actually works, which isn't always as easy as it seems.
Yeah, so we're going to talk more about that. But so you definitely have to identify the needs of a specific niche in order to have a good chance of success. So what are the pitfalls that go into, we'll talk about software development for a second, but what are the pitfalls you've seen in basically the ideation and the strategy and then, the focusing on the needs and the niches that you've seen in the product development process?
Yeah, well, I guess it can be, when you're talking about a niche can be narrow and maybe high value, which is great, or it can be very broad. Like a niche can be like Apple Pay addresses a niche of like nearly everybody who has an iPhone, who suddenly doesn't have to pull their wallet out of their pocket and fish for a credit card to make a payment, just tap and pay. That, I guess you could call that a niche. The niche is very, very broad, and it reduces a friction point that we maybe didn't even know we had or were experiencing until we saw a better way of doing it. That's like the biggest size mass opportunities still kind of address the same problem of friction. But then, yes, on smaller niches that are high value, really just comes from that experience. And I guess all of those things come down to product market fit, right? That you're actually building something that meets the needs of your target audience, whether it's a broad mass audience or a smaller niche. It's getting that product market fit. And that takes, trial and error, and usually isn't something that you can get right the first time unless you're very, very smart or very lucky, or a combination of both. And I think that one of the mistakes that a lot of entrepreneurs make is that they think they understand how to get that product market fit at the very beginning. And I think that's because entrepreneurs have a lot of self-belief, or they wouldn't be entrepreneurs. Statistically, if you start a business, statistically, it's very, very likely to fail. So you have to have extraordinary self-belief to ignore those statistical odds and build something anyway. And not listen to the doubters and the naysayers who are probably all around you, your friends, your family, normal people who have jobs and wonder why you're so crazy to build a business of your own. All those people are telling you not to do it. So you have to have a lot of self-belief to ignore that and make it happen. And that's a real asset. But sometimes that self-belief gets in the way of listening and taking input, or knowing what we're good at and what we're not good at. And sometimes that translates into technology development. So, an entrepreneur may know a niche very well, and they may have worked in that niche for years, but translating that into software and delivering an experience that people want to engage with and use repeatedly is a different skill set. And not every entrepreneur is born with that. So it's important to, try to test the waters and take input and use trial and error along the way before they spend enormous amounts of time and money thinking that they've got it right at the very beginning.
Yeah. So let's talk more about that, because I think that's a really important topic about entrepreneurs. And I think you've keyed into something really important about the self-belief and the self-confidence. And I guess we all know the famous stories of Steve Jobs, how he just believed that the product was going to be this. He knew what it was going to be. Damn the market research. Damn the other experts. Those guys don't know. I know. I'm going to make it happen. And he did. And he turned it into $1 trillion company, and it's massively successful. So, but not all of us are Steve Jobs, and not all of us are brilliant and know exactly. And not all of us have unlimited amounts of money to put at problems. So when, in your experience, when should the entrepreneur go all in on the self-belief, and when should they listen, do market research, talk to customers, pay for market research, build trials, do focus groups, figure that stuff out to learn from what the market's saying? How do they navigate that? Let's think about it from the entrepreneur's perspective first. How do they navigate that self-confidence and listening?
Yeah, definitely. Well, yeah, I mean, the Steve Jobs example is an interesting one, because he certainly was an extraordinary individual and an exceptional entrepreneur. But even Steve Jobs knew that he needed to surround himself with knowledgeable people who could help carry out his vision. He definitely had enormous self-belief in terms of especially product design and user experience, which separated him from rivals like Microsoft, who had to invent things like Clippy, the friendly paperclip, to guide you through their very poorly designed products. Steve Jobs was all about elegance and design and user experience, but even he needed a product designer like Johnny Ive, who actually translated that vision into user experience and screens. And there was plenty of testing that went on to validate these things. And of course, some of those ideas that Steve Jobs built his business on were things that he picked up and observed along the way, in Silicon Valley at places like Xerox PARC and elsewhere, where they designed the first mouse and the first graphical user interface. So he was visionary, but he also understood that he needed to, take input and get the right people around him. And I think that's true for every other entrepreneur. And unless you have already built a track record of designing technology successfully, you need to collaborate with people who understand that. And nobody has it right. So, and every niche is different, and what people want out of that product is different from one product to the next. So you have to put things out there. And I think the fundamental thing to emphasize is putting things out there early, not filling them with the bells and whistles that one imagines should be there, but hasn't confirmed or validated. Just getting it out there, getting feedback, and then incorporating that feedback and releasing the next version. So people refer to these as prototypes in the earliest form. They can even be like paper prototypes. They don't even have to be designed on screen at all. And then also then an MVP, which is a term we hear a lot of, the minimum viable product. But of course, what often goes wrong at that point is that what an entrepreneur imagines to be the minimum viable product is often much larger than what the real minimum viable product is. And a lot of entrepreneurs have trouble letting go of what they imagine should be in the product. They don't even feel they can release an MVP unless it has some of the things that they imagine should be in there. So that ends up being sometimes jokingly called, the minimum acceptable product, but it's not really the minimum viable product. And that's where you can sometimes lose a lot of time and money, having gone down paths that your users would have told you shouldn't have bothered with. So,
yeah. And I can imagine that's a particularly difficult decision to navigate with a team, right? So what is the minimum viable product? What is the minimum acceptable product? What is the ultimate product? What is the entrepreneur's vision? What is the, and can they let go of that vision enough to do what the market wants and what's really sellable? And then when do we pivot when we don't get the answers that we want, right? How have you seen that, those decisions get worked out in your experience with either, CEOs you've consulted with or companies you've been part of? How do you make those decisions within a team?
Ultimately the entrepreneur, the founder, or maybe the co-founders, they have ultimate responsibility. And of course, even if they're co-founders, somebody should own the product. It should never be a groupthink type of decision. You have to have a product owner. And that person is responsible for working with the technology team, whether it's an in-house team, which is risky in the early days, because you're hiring skills and people that you may or may not actually need, depending on what you learn as you develop the product, or you can outsource it. But you have to have a product owner in-house who is responsible for interacting with the build team. And then, yes, you need to have an ultimate vision. You definitely have to have a sense of where you want this product to be in a year, in 3 years, in 5 years. But you also have to recognize that you may very well be wrong, or the pace of technology development may actually change your view along the way of what you should be offering or how it should be offered. So you have to have a lot of flexibility. And the most successful entrepreneurs that I've encountered have released a simple version of what they want to market, and then have added features as their customers have told them what they want. Or in some cases, they've already been running something for several years, and then they reach a point where the business trajectory is heading, up and to the right, but their technology isn't flexible enough to support the direction that the business is heading in. The commercial opportunity isn't necessarily supported by the first version of software. And in some cases, they need to rebuild the software entirely at that point. Or if they were lucky, they built it in a modular enough fashion to be able to add to it and change it later on. And the nice thing about technology today is that it's becoming more and more modular, and functionality to do things that used to be complicated and time consuming and costly is now, sometimes available off the shelf, and you can build and assemble things almost like a Lego set in a much more modular way than before. So there's really no excuse for overspending or overdeveloping at this point.
So in all of that, it sounds remarkably complicated, what you're talking about. You're talking about like strategically getting enough experience to identify a problem and identify a market niche that you really want to go after, and then figuring out what the right solution is for that, the minimum viable product. Then you got to do all these other things like hire people, decide to outsource or insource. You have a product owner, have collaboration to figure out the vision, figure out where to go, and then figure out where to launch it, how to price it. It's incredibly complicated. In your experience, is it best to kind of think, or do the best entrepreneurs and teams have a methodology that's like, here's how we do it? It's cookie cutter. We understand all the pieces. it's a project plan, or are they? What is there a role for luck here? We put a bunch of stuff out there. Man, we picked the right technology that's flexible to go where we didn't know the market was going to go, but fortunately, we just happened to have the right tech that was flexible to go there, and we built the features that, wow, we got that key customer. Who knew? So, what's the role of luck versus methodical methodology in making that happen?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I think that's a fundamental question of entrepreneurship in general. It's not even particularly technology related, and I think it is a combination of factors. It's sometimes it's just catching lightning in a bottle, and sometimes it is being in the right place at the right time, as well as being good at what you do. I mean, if you're not good at what you do, no matter what else happens, you're probably not going to be successful. If you get the basics right, and then you're also lucky, the timing to be in the right place at the right time, all of those things, then yeah, all those factors contribute to being successful. And there's also, I think in technology, one of the factors is that actually when I worked at Excite.com many years ago, our first founding CEO was a young guy named Joe Kraus, who's currently the CEO of Lime, the bicycle and scooter rental company. And at the time he said, being early is the same as being wrong. And that's very true in technology, and we've seen that a lot. Companies that had exactly the right idea, but were 5 or 10 years too early, got supplanted by someone who came along and just built a better, more modern version of it. So yeah, timing has a lot to do with it. But definitely that's all the more reason why one has to maintain flexibility with technology, because if you hard code everything into your technology, then you no longer have the room to pivot and change and adapt as the market and as customer needs ask you to, and then you're stuck. Then you've invested in something that maybe you'll have a decent enough business, but you might not be, the number one in the category, or you might miss the category that you didn't anticipate that suddenly emerged out of nowhere. So, that's the important part, I think, is maintaining that flexibility, which means just not hard coding everything into your product from the very beginning.
Yeah, and there's probably hard coding in the software. There's maybe even hard coding in the business model. I don't know if I told you this story before, Evan, but when I started my first company, started my entrepreneurial journey, it was in the early 90s at the beginning of the commercial internet. And that was just an example of being in the right place at the right time. I had no idea the internet was coming. I had no idea that the internet was going to be what it is and change all of our lives. I just was starting this company. And I had this little concept called online computer market. Wouldn't it be cool if we could use modems and dial up into a database and buy computer products? Because I was in the computer industry at the time. And I went to computer companies and I said, hey, we could put all of your products and services online. Wouldn't that be cool? And then people could shop across different ones and make purchase decisions much more easily and seamlessly. And they said, that is the stupidest idea we've ever heard anybody say. Why would we want to put our products out there to get shopped across our competitors? But what they did say is, there's this World Wide Web thing out there. Can you build us a website? Mm-hmm. And I was running out of money. And so I said, of course. So we turned into a web development company, and then that was very successful for me. So it was an example like the whole business model had to pivot because the market really wasn't ready for that. I didn't have enough money to make that leap at the time. So, are you seeing that too? Are you seeing people like not only change the business model or the product, or are you seeing entrepreneurs go in now and say they've got more money, they get more focused, they're doing better research, they're just better at doing it than I might have been in the 90s, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's still very similar. That's a really interesting story. And I think that's a great example of just like persevering and, having enough staying power, even if sometimes the runway feels short when you're in the middle of it all. And then something else comes along and you're positioned with the right skills and the right knowledge to make something happen. And I think that's still the case. I think what's interesting maybe nowadays is that the pace of technology is just continuing to accelerate. And that, changes things. Sometimes it seems every, 6 to 12 months nowadays. So obviously, like the explosion of AI is an obvious example that's on everyone's lips at the moment. And, in my opinion, that's actually a very legitimate new technology, putting aside all the moral and societal questions it raises. But just from a technical point of view, AI is a useful tool that can be incorporated into products, or it can even help to build products. So people who are paying attention to that and are legitimately finding ways to use it are benefiting from it, including sometimes letting it write the code for you to a certain extent, meaning that you can code and develop even faster. But then, sometimes it also becomes a bit trendy, and there's a trendy element to AI where you see entrepreneurs who have just added it to their investor deck because they think it should be in there. And 2 or 3 years ago, you would see all these projects. Everybody had to have NFTs in their product, and then you would ask them, why do you need NFTs? Why do your users need NFTs? And they would stammer and maybe come up with some sort of rationalization, but in most cases, they didn't really need NFTs at all. They just needed a database and things like that. So you can start to see these trends, and obviously people who are reacting to trends and trying to bolt them onto their product, I would argue, are probably less likely to be successful, because it's doing things for all the wrong reasons. It all has to come down to, what do users really need? What are they looking for? What would really help them improve their lives or reduce friction in their day-to-day experience? That's really always the starting point. AI ticks that box in many cases. NFTs, maybe not so much. So, I think that's always still important.
Yeah. So there's the trendy, exciting things that are out there that entrepreneurs could grasp on. So let's just kind of use that AI, the AI thing that's happening right now as an example. If I was an entrepreneur and I'm trying to build a niche product around AI, there's probably dozens of examples we could think about, but let's just think about, what's the process I should be using to decide really like how to give that new product the most chance of success as a product strategy. How do I get there as an entrepreneur? And I know there's lots of different starting points, but from what you've seen, like if I'm an entrepreneur and I want to build this new product, we've got a vision, AI using it in this niche. How do I get there?
Yeah, well, I guess if we're using AI as an example, it would basically be around how AI might help to make certain things happen faster or more effectively, or using fewer resources, or doing something that maybe it could have only been done manually before, and therefore at a much lower volume and at a higher cost. And with technology products, there are lots of things that benefit from scale. You can just provide more options faster, and make decisions more quickly. So again, it comes down to that same fundamental: will this improve the experience, or will it improve our ability to deliver the experience more effectively, more cheaply, whatever it might be? And there are plenty of examples of AI being incorporated to do that. An obvious example is in the medical space, and these are things that many of us have probably heard of. AI is proven to be better at looking at large numbers of X-rays and MRIs and being able to detect cancer and tumors much more at a higher volume and faster than humans can, and with fewer errors. So that's already revolutionizing the medical sector. And AI can flag something and say, I think this is cancerous, and then a human can review it and confirm it. And there are lots of other consumer-facing or B2B products that are beginning to incorporate that. So that's where something like AI comes in: faster, higher volume, greater accuracy, more cost-effective delivery of services. So if you can find a role for that, and your customers and your team and your business would benefit from that, then that's worthwhile. But just trying to figure out, how do we use AI, is maybe not the right way to approach it. It's trying to solve a problem first is really the starting point.
Yeah. And I think you said something simple, but incredibly revolutionary, which is focus on the benefits and the quantifiable high impact, whether they're big benefits to a big audience or small benefits to a small audience. You got to focus on those benefits and maybe stay relentlessly focused on that and find the niche that really values those benefits. I think, as I've tried to develop products, I mean, we're a services business, but I've dabbled in product development over the years. I think that one of the mistakes that I've made is getting excited about a new technology, along the way, and then trying to find someone who might be interested in buying that technology. But I was just really excited about using it. And I think that's where AI could, get in the way today. Like, it's not always better, cheaper, faster, but it could be. But I think that, doing technology for its own sake is maybe a path for disaster. Is it true?
Yeah, well, definitely for distraction, at least for sure. And yeah, I think entrepreneurs are notorious for pursuing the bright, shiny object, right? Because without generalizing too much, many entrepreneurs are, probably experiencing some amount of ADHD, and that's why they're actually quite good at being entrepreneurs, because they like to think about lots of different things and different thoughts cross their mind, whereas other people might be more linear and happy to stay in their more well-defined space. So entrepreneurs are great at that, but that also makes them feel, be very susceptible to pursuing the bright, shiny object. And when that becomes a product development initiative, then that can really be costly as a distraction, unless there really is a proven demonstrated need for it. And also, it's about the productivity tools that entrepreneurs use. They're every day, I'm sure that you experience this as well. And, there's some new tool or service or innovation that you should look at as an entrepreneur. Try this out, free trial, whatever it might be. But you could spend your whole day trying out new tools and feeling very productive because you've engaged and clicked on so many different things. But at the end of the day, what have you gotten done? I think there's more and more noise coming at all of us, whether we're entrepreneurs or just individuals, and filtering out the noise, so that we use our time, which is our only, ultimate asset, and we can't create any more of it. Managing our time well and productively is critical, and that's even more and more challenging today with so much coming at us all the time. So yeah, that's equally important, I think.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I see that in my own experience a lot. So I get offers for products to use in marketing that solve problems that are just a piece of a problem that I've already solved with another product. So it's right. Like it's hard to imagine in marketing. I haven't kept up with it, but as of a couple of years ago, there were 7,000 different marketing tools and companies that had been developed to do what I do in digital marketing. And there's just no way I can even evaluate 7,000 products. We use probably 50 tools on a day-to-day basis, maybe 60 across, 5 different service areas. So, but 7,000, these are all companies with product managers and software development teams. And, it's a little overwhelming. I want to shift gears a little bit and ask you for your experience, maybe even outside of the product area, but what lessons can be learned from your experience in product development for services companies? Let's say you've got a law firm and you're trying to innovate legal services, or you got an accounting firm and you've got a consulting firm, or you're a marketing agency, right? How do you think about service innovation, and what can we learn from the product development teams that might help us with service innovation and trying to solve different problems in service delivery?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Good question. I guess it prompts a couple of thoughts. I mean, first of all, we're not imminently going to replace humans in terms of experience and knowledge and perspective on things. I mean, yes, an AI engine can process a higher volume of human knowledge faster than we can, but in terms of the accumulation of experience and the interpretation of that experience and the ability to communicate it and contextually so that other humans can understand that's still our greatest asset. And it's hard for me, as much of a technological fanboy as I may be sometimes, it's hard for me to imagine that that's going to change anytime soon. It's just the trust that comes with talking to another person. But at the same time, we do waste a lot of human capacity doing manual tasks that could be automated and handled and improved in different ways. So I think the benefit of using technology could be to free humans from those manual tasks, to allow them to do more of the stuff that they're really good at, which is providing perspective and context and sharing our expertise in that way. So it's probably true that I could do some digital marketing myself using some of these turnkey tools and solutions, but probably if I came to you and asked for your advice and guidance, I would probably end up being more successful and more targeted than if I tried to do it self-service. So I think professional services firms can automate a lot of the grunt work, and that could lead to changes in jobs and roles, and maybe people at the entry level are going to have to figure out how they stand out and differentiate themselves more clearly earlier in their careers. But in terms of delivering a service to customers, I think it has the potential to free intellectual capacity by using some of these tools, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's definitely a role for innovation in service delivery. We're using tools like AI or in product development in general. So
yeah. And the other thing I would say, sorry to interrupt, but the one other thing I'd add to that is if people are like me, I don't like to deal with other people as much as some institutions require me to. Like if I want to do banking, I would just like to get on an app or on a screen and do what I need. I don't want to have to call someone and, the usual stuff that we all have to suffer with sometimes. So I think these technologies do provide the opportunity to offer people a much better experience, letting them accomplish and achieve what they need to, and then move on with their day rather than waiting on hold or standing in a queue or whatever it might be. Sometimes we need that personal touch, and we should be able to get it when we need to. But sometimes a lot of institutions and organizations force us to expend time and effort engaging with them in ways that could be greatly improved using thoughtfully designed technology. So that is another benefit of services companies if they think about that and set themselves up that way.
Yeah. So there's a lot that services companies can learn from innovation and smart product development.
Yeah, definitely.
This has been a powerful conversation. Thank you so much for sharing a lot of good ideas here. If any of our listeners want to connect with you and just interact on product development strategies and ideas, how would they reach you?
Yeah, thank you. The best way would be they can email me at Evan, EVAN, at subhub.com, SUBHUB.com.
Great. Well, Evan, again, thanks for taking the time, and I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks. It's great speaking with you, David. Thanks for having me.